Fish around in your packets and find, you'll see all the elements on the agenda, but find the mission statement. If somebody with a good, strong voice want to read that mission statement for everybody, the rest of us will follow along. A volunteer to read the mission statement. I gotta get off on that. Yes, sir. Stand up, introduce yourself, and read it.
The Southern working class can and will organize itself into strong unions with full collective bargaining rights. Strong Southern unions will result in strong voting rights, human and civil rights, and greater prosperity for all workers. 60% of the black workers within the U.S. live in the South. Therefore, Southern Workers Assembly centers leadership and voices of black workers. The Workers' Assembly is a strategy to educate, organize, and mobilize a broad social workers movement in the fight for power. The groundwork must be prepared today for tomorrow's victory. It is to that end that the Southern Workers Assembly dedicates itself first by helping the most militant worker/organizers form committees in major non-union workplaces. Second, by linking together such committees into action networks, workers' assemblies by regions, sectors, or corporate ownership, capable of leading public collective action in support of immediate wage and benefit gains. Third, by encouraging new and existing unions to fully engage in major non-union workplaces regardless of NLRB election prospects. Forward to building the Southern Workers Movement.
Thank you, sir. Sir and brother, thank you. Can you hear me if I don't use this?
No.
This is really a disrespectful group. All right, so before we talk about organizing methodology or tactics, you have to have a strategy, and the strategy has to fit the facts that we find ourselves in. And the strategy has to be based, particularly for a working class movement, on some analysis and understanding of power. How do you get it? How do you lose it? How do you exercise it? Are there any rights connected to it? So first, the question is, does the strategy fit the facts? So you notice in the mission statement, we're not talking about union elections. In other words, by that I mean, probably most of you know this, but just in case. To get a union in the private sector in the United States of America, you have to get certified by the government. And you get certified by the government by winning a labor board election, which we call an RC election, recognition certification, RC election. So, and that's the only way in the private sector. Public sector is a little different. We could talk about that when we get to rights. But for the private sector, they've closed off every avenue except the avenue of the RC election. So the first fact we've got to look at is what's the story with the RC election. If we can get a union that easily, then that's what we should do. We should not be, saying, well, we should build committees and build cadre and build networks. We should just go and get a union. But the problem is that we can't, and I'm going to give you some figures here. Wishful thinking isn't going to make the figures change. Now, I know y'all can't see this, so I'm going to read it out. There's 118,750,000 private sector workers in our country without union organization and without collective bargaining rights. 94% of the private sector workers have no collective bargaining rights. And that's something on the land of the free and the home of the brave. Right? So that's the number. Now let me give you another number. 74,000 people were engaged in labor board elections in 2016. That was under the Obama administration. 74,000. 51,000 in 2020. That was under the Trump administration. 62,000 this past year under the Biden administration. Those figures, 51,000, 62,000, drop in the bucket compared to 118 million people. Right? If you do the arithmetic, it would take us roughly 2,000 years to organize even half of the working class in the United States by using the RC election model. So whether we like it or not, the question of just simply saying, well, I'm gonna try to get a majority of people to sign some sort of union card and have an election, and then we're gonna have a union, turns out to be bullshit. Now, that would be nice if it was true, but it doesn't work. And it doesn't add up to any kind of analysis of power. You say, well, let's say we do have a union election in the place I work. So now I'm a little island in the sea of bosses and non-union workers. So one of the conclusions we draw is the obvious conclusion, that a single election in a single workplace is not a strategy. Much of the labor movement, unfortunately, is still wedded to that concept. Look around for some shop. Is there the potential to find a majority that would support the union in that shop? Petition the government to hold an election, hold the election, win it or lose it, and that's what we think of today as union organizing. That's not union organizing. That's voting, right? So you vote for a union on Tuesday, you don't have a union on Wednesday. Right? All you did is vote yes. So we reject the idea that the RC all by itself, the RC election is the way to go, and we certainly reject the idea that the RC election in one workplace at a time is any solution to our problems. So let's talk a little bit about a power analysis. The guys, and most of them are guys, the people who employ us aren't running a charity. They run the business to make a profit. If they can't make a profit, they close the business and they throw us out of work. So the question then is how do we affect their ability to make profit? And we have to think about that in a very strategic sense, not just in the one workplace where you work in, but overall. That's why we're saying that this has to be a movement that is multi-locational. And it has to pick its concentrations. So, for example, you think about the South. There's those blue signs with the H on it. There's hospitals all over the South. Right? There's battery plants for the new electric vehicles all over the South. There's auto assembly plants all over the South. You need to pick some places where you can concentrate and have the maximum ability to apply power. So that becomes an extremely important question for us. Excuse me. So what we are advocating as a strategy is that if you can't have a majority going in, we don't wait around for a majority to miraculously develop. You have to have a committee, a cadre, a group of leaders in key workplaces that will exercise. Is there something you want?
I was just saying.
I know you're telling me something. that would exercise, begin to move people into collective action. Begin to convince people by activity, by practice, that solidarity works. The reason people are scared is they don't see how solidarity, how collective action can actually improve their conditions. So that it becomes very, very important in the beginning that these cadre begin to take some action on issues of concern to people. Now the question then is to maximize our power, we have to do that and then start to move out of the workplace. We start in the workplace, but you move out of the workplace into the public. If you stay in the workplace, you're on the boss's territory. He owns the place, right? He can fire you pretty much at will. So what you want to do is move over to a terrain that is a little bit easier for us. So let's say, for example, that let's pretend this was an assembly, and we've developed one or two or three key demands, right, that we want resolved. What we want to do is we want to bring a number of locations right here in Charlotte into public collective action on those demands. And we don't want to stay isolated in this workplace for that workplace or the other workplace. We have to put them together, even though they may not have the same commonality, right? They may be different employers, they may be different industries, different occupations. That's okay. We want to make the shop issue a public issue. And that gives the boss a certain amount of problem, where he can't bottle it up in his office, right? He has to answer for it in a much broader atmosphere. So the question of maximizing our power becomes a crucial question, and the solution to that really is to start to form networks. So, for example, when we were organizing the hospital nurses in the South, a little bit of analysis showed us that the for-profit hospital chains centered in Florida and Texas. Now, you don't have to be a genius to figure that out. They center in the place where the state doesn't bother them. So we concentrated our organizing in Florida and Texas. There was not a hospital a hospital nurses union in the entire state of Texas. There are now 15. But it started, you see, by forming the network. We started by forming the National Nurses Organizing Committee. And we didn't start out with the idea that we're going to organize a union in this hospital or that hospital. We started out with the idea that we're going to organize the National Nurses Organizing Committee in Florida, in Texas, in Tennessee, in Kansas, in other states. And so that's where we started. Most of the people that we started with in the NNOC were not pro-union. They were pro making improvements in their working conditions, but they didn't necessarily see that connection between doing that and having a union. So we want a multi-location approach. We want to tie the locations together, either by geography, or by occupation, nurses, or by industry, hospitality, or home care. And so that we begin to maximize our ability to impact the boss's ability to make a profit. That's what this is all about. And the minute we don't understand that, we're off into the ozone layer someplace. And somehow or other, we're going to persuade the people who own Amazon or Target that they should make some changes. They are unpersuadable on this question. The other thing to keep in mind, going back to the labor board election, we're not saying that you shouldn't use labor board election. We are saying, however, you should use it under very specific circumstances. In other words, what you want is not one labor board election. You want a whole lot of labor board elections, and you want them concentrated in time. Why do you want that? Because you want to end up in bargaining with a multi-location facility. When the ILA bargains, they bargain as the ILA on the East Coast. They don't bargain Savannah and then Charleston and then Galveston, right? They bargain it as a network. And the network is historically proven to be true. That's where UE comes from, that's where the auto workers come from, that's where the NLC comes from, that's where the teachers union comes from. These are all networks. UE 150 is a network. That's really what it is. It also wants to be a union, but it's a network of public sector workers spread around North Carolina. Southern Service Workers wants to be a network. They don't want just one or two places. They want a network of places. So we gotta be thinking along those lines, and not so much thinking about what can I do just simply in my one isolated workplace. So that really is a strategy. It isn't that complicated. It's historically proven to be correct. And the question then becomes, moving on this direction as quickly as we can with the help of existing unions or developing new unions. It doesn't have to be the old unions. You know, the CIO was developed by new unions. There was no UE then, there was no UAW then, there was no steelworkers then. So we want to get rid of that idea, and we want to also get rid of the idea that the election gives us the union, because that puts us in a different perspective. The election gives us the ticket to the dance. It's not the dance. It's not the dance. success in organizing the workplace comes when you can negotiate a contract with the boss that is satisfactory to the members. Satisfactory to the members. That's when so the campaign goes from the cadre all the way to the network, all the way to actually negotiating and ratifying a contract that your members appreciate and recognize as they step forward. That means that in the very beginning of organizing, we should be talking about how do we get that agreement out of the boss. And that means you've got to be talking in the beginning about work stoppages and picketing and strikes. And if we shy away from that, we're playing the boss's game. We're going to be ready for that. We don't run out, with the first two people you talk to in your workplace and say, guess what, we're going to go on strike? Probably not. No. You want to build up to it. Right? You want to get to the point where you can start to get people confident on the idea that they can take some collective action and they can depend on one another. And that's a question of solidarity, and that's what, so that I want to be able to look over here and put my hand out, and I want somebody to take my hand. And she puts her hand out, and she gets somebody to take her hand. And I learned that from practice. I learned that by doing it. I can't be convinced just by somebody talking to me that that's the case. I have to go out and get 5 people together, and 10 people, and 15 people, and do something on behalf of all the other people. And they're all moving to the multi-location approach, which is how the unions were organized in the very beginning. Unfortunately, many unions simply have stopped organizing at all. It got too hard to do. The one location, one election wasn't getting them anywhere, and so they just simply stopped. Let me tell you something that will surprise you. The labor movement has plenty of money. Plenty of money. We are in decline. Our memberships are lower than they've been since the 1920s. But we have plenty of money in the Treasury. In fact, I found out how much. $35.8 billion in assets. $35.8 billion in assets.
With a B?
With a B, billion, collectively.
That's right.
The second biggest congregation of money next to the Gates Foundation. Now, if you walked into this room and handed us a couple $1 million, we could figure out how to, we could do some shit. So the problem is a lack of willingness and maybe somewhat a lack of understanding. One of the things that the law has done to us is it's convinced us that this is how we get a union, and we can't see any other way of doing it, even though our own unions were formed in a different kind of way. But it is key, and we say in our mission statement, we want to be out here, we want to be doing stuff, we want to start to loosen up some of that money out of the Treasury. You can do a lot of things. You can hire 20,000 organizers. You could fund new unions. They don't have to be the old unions. They could be new unions, right? There's many things that could be done. So we see some signs of that, and that needs to be encouraged. And we need to encourage it by what we can do as well, I think.